Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Word Balloon. This is John Siuntres. Great double feature for you today. We're going to start things off talking with author Patty Farmer about her brand new book, Playboy Swings. Playboy Swings looks at the idea of Playboy as really a lifestyle that progressed through the Playboy clubs, the incredible influence on jazz music, and also comedy through the 1960s, but really also just the idea of Playboy as a lifestyle and its evolution from beyond just a magazine, but really becoming this important cultural movement. Patty interviewed over 200 people that were involved in performing and operating the Playboy clubs. There are a lot of great stories here involving show business and encounters with the mob and just really dealing with all the cultural moments of the 60s through the Playboy prism, from civil rights to, of course, sexual awareness and beyond. It's an excellent history of the Playboy clubs and really a side of the 60s from a very specific point of view. The book is on sale now. Then we're going to be talking to Riley Brown. Riley continues to do excellent work for Marvel with the character Deadpool, specifically with the Infinite Comics, and he's in the midst of a story right now with Fabian Nicieza. We talk about his work on the Infinite Comics and beyond, and as always, just a great conversation with Riley Brown. Two neat conversations for you on today's Word Balloon. Let's get things started now with Patty Farmer. You know, it was just announced last week that Pamela Anderson will be the last nude model to be featured in Playboy, the January-February issue that actually comes out this month in just a couple weeks. But it was a good opportunity, good timing to release this conversation. Also, Patty's book is available now, and you can get it if you go to Amazon through the Word Balloon portal. If you go from wordballoon.com and click on the Amazon tab, it will take you to the Word Balloon store, and Word Balloon gets a little kickback. It never costs you more to order things through Word Balloon, but given that it is the Christmas season, if you've got some other things on your list that you want to consider buying through Amazon, I ask you to do it through Word Balloon and show your patronage, and I thank you for that kind of support. But let's start things off with the author of Playboy Swings, a great conversation with Patty Farmer to start things off on Word Balloon. Very happy to have on the line the author of Playboy Swings. It's Patty Farmer, who has just written an outstanding book about the rise of Playboy, not only as a magazine, but really a culture. And it's a pleasure to have you on, Patty. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, John. It's my pleasure.
You know, I'm based in Chicago, and really it was only until a couple of years ago that the letters came down from what was Playboy's headquarters here on the very north end of Chicago's Loop. And it was part of the thrill knowing not only being a radio broadcaster in Chicago and stuff, but, you know, just remembering Chicago's strength as a media giant when all the big cities kind of were operating independently. And Playboy's, you know, inception in 1953, you know, came pretty much just a couple of years after the golden age of television and was part of that media rise. And it was, you know, I mean, as a little kid, I remember the strength of Playboy certainly in the early 70s.
Oh, definitely. Hefner was really a brilliant businessman. He branded the name Playboy way before, you know, Donald Trump ever thought about putting the name Trump on a building. You know, people definitely recognize the name Playboy around the world and the strength that it has behind it.
Yeah, and you know, just this year, it's kind of melancholy as we're closing out 2015, and we hear that Playboy is making this change to, you know, get rid of the nudes, which, you know, obviously was part of the beginnings of Playboy. And it's funny how it's reverting back. Well, in some people's eyes, it's reverting to a more Maxim or some of these other young men's magazines. But as you point out, Playboy really was a culture beyond the nude pictures and really was this amazing style-making creation. And I think it's interesting to note, and it comes through in a lot of your interviews, that it wasn't Hef fully formed, pipe and dinner jacket, or I should say his pajamas and his smoking jacket, right. But it really was this kind of eager young man, much like his own readers, that were trying to be cool and really look for a blueprint on how to be cool.
I think you hit that right on the head, John. We see Hef evolve right along with his audience. You know, what makes a Playboy? You know, what's the ideal Playboy man, I think was the logo of the magazine. And Hef was kind of evolving, as I said, right along with his readers.
Really neat. And obviously fashion was a big part of it. And again, the joke always was, well, Playboy, I buy it for the magazine, or I buy it for the articles. But the reality was, really, I mean, there was great fiction in here. There was great interviews as well. Authors like Arthur C. Clarke and Ian Fleming were serialized in Playboy. I'll let you continue as far as fiction and nonfiction, for that matter.
Well, you mentioned Ian Fleming, and at the early years of the magazine, Ian wrote 7 short stories for Playboy, and this was the seed that developed into the Bond movies. On Her Majesty's Secret Service appeared in Playboy, and then it was bought and made into, the movie that we all see, or all have seen. And Ian Fleming and James Bond, they were kind of, part of the Playboy mystique, too. I think James Bond even admired the power of Playboy. In Diamonds Are Forever, we see him opening his wallet at one point, and right next to his license to kill is his Playboy card. So that was very telling, very James Bond, but very Playboy.
Absolutely, and I want to talk about the keys and the clubs in a second, because certainly that is part of the evolution of the business and again the culture. Starting though with things like music, it's interesting because obviously jazz was such a big part of Playboy, and that was really cool to see. And I'm kind of an amateur jazz fan. I'm not somebody that knows every name, but I really do love a lot of what became West Coast jazz, like Dave Brubeck and people like that, and just, again, that kind of period that Playboy was created in. Did you ever find out, before we get into the jazz stuff, because 53 is when, obviously, Playboy started, but that rock wasn't as much of a part of the culture that the magazine was trying to project? Was rock really more teenage music, and jazz was the more sophisticated music to kind of shoot for?
I think it's as simple as that jazz was Hef's music of choice. Hef loved jazz. He liked the American Songbook, but growing up he liked jazz. When he was in high school, he wrote for his high school newspaper about music, about jazz. So I think it was really that simple. He just liked it. So he incorporated it into everything that he loved doing. As far as back as the magazine, you mentioned the magazine started in 1953. That issue with Marilyn Monroe on the cover, he could have had a feature article about, any movie star, any sports star, any politician, and yet that first article is about the Dorsey brothers. So, that was where he got his kicks. He was able to do what he liked, what he really enjoyed. And even when he started that, iconic Playboy interviews in 1962, again, he could have had anyone, and he had Miles Davis as that first Playboy interview.
Wow, that's amazing, and I forgot about that in the book. One thing I focused on, obviously, and I knew this too before the book, have among the people that did Playboy interviews, Alex Haley, who, I guess his interview with Malcolm X became the basis of his later fleshed out book of the same subject. And also, of course, people might remember Alex Haley from Roots.
Right, that small little book.
Exactly. But I mentioned to you before we started recording, I had an issue that I felt like really was kind of in the heart of the demographic. And I'll be interested, actually, when I tell you the month and year, where you would put it in Playboy's life. It's February of '65. It's the Jazz Poll Winners magazine with I don't know if that's her on the cover, Kim Novak. There's a pictorial of Kim Novak, and then also a Beatles interview. And again, February of '65. So this is really early in Beatlemania, and conducted by Gene Shepard, which I love too. And just being the pop culture nerd that I am. He, of course, is the narrator and creator of A Christmas Story.
Yeah.
among other things. The great radio voice of WOR, and really Christmas Story is kind of based on the same kind of storytelling he told on the air. But that's the thing. I mean, my God, this magazine has so much great culture of the moment in it. And I don't know. So where would you put like February '65 in terms of Playboy's life? Is that kind of the heart of its prime? Where would you say?
You hit that right on the head, John. It was up and going and really at the pinnacle. At that time, the Playboy clubs were in full swing around the country. It was cool, it was hip, it was sophisticated. The clubs were a place where not only great entertainers, musicians, singers, comedians went to perform, but also the greats went just to hang out. Tony Bennett could be seen there often, just bringing his friends to listen to music or, go for dinner or hang out. You mentioned the Beatles. John Lennon, after that famous appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, their first appearance in America, he was asked, where he wanted to go to spend the evening, and he said he and his wife then, Cynthia, wanted to go to the Playboy Club. So that's how John Lennon spent that night when, women, young girls ringed the Plaza Hotel looking for them and Ed Sullivan Studios, and they went to the Playboy Club.
That's fantastic. And, again, as the company evolved, it went from the magazine and things in the magazine to the clubs themselves. And, it's that great period in the 60s where nightclubs were still, a big hub of classy entertainment. And Playboy very quickly asserted itself with the first club in Chicago among a bunch of, very successful nightclubs. I mean, there was a happening nightclub scene both in music and comedy in Chicago. It was interesting. I guess I didn't realize literally as the first Playboy Club was opening, the Black Orchid, which was a very famous nightclub in Chicago, was closing down. And that was kind of maybe a lucky break, but maybe not. Again, it seems like Playboy was really able to step in and assert itself from the beginning.
They were able to quickly, assert themselves as the place to go among other clubs. That was the era where, you didn't have one or two jazz clubs or nightclubs. You had a lot of them, and everybody did well because of it. I think it's kind of a sad commentary that we don't have that nowadays. You
Absolutely.
see one or two opening and a dozen closing. And, it's a sign of the times. 1965 was a different era, a different time. It was the time of the nightclubs. But, that first club, 1960, it was great. Among the early entertainers, they had a young Aretha Franklin. She was still a teenager. Ramsey Lewis, great comedians, Irwin Corey, Dick Gregory, just on and on. Name somebody and they were there. It was just wonderful, wonderful entertainment. And they quickly opened in Miami, New Orleans, New York, and then just really around the country, Dallas and Cincinnati and. So it was a great time. It was a cool time. And Hef wanted a nightclub where people bought memberships, and they weren't expensive. It was $25 for a key. And if you were in Cincinnati, you felt like you were in your club. I'm going to my club, the Playboy Club. Or if you were in Dallas, it was the same thing. And you were assured of great quality in entertainment and food. And, of course, the bunnies weren't hard on the eye either.
Absolutely. My uncle was a key member. I remember seeing that on his keychain, and he was very proud of that, and was part of that Mad Men cocktail generation. That's the great thing is that Hef from the beginning was very much about freedom of expression, of sexuality, and the cool thing was, the bunnies were this obvious eye candy, but there were strict rules. And it's not like it was easy to, just kind of make time with a bunny, at least if they, and it sounded like most of them were kind of keeping to the rules.
Oh, absolutely. They were very strict, and for a number of reasons. They had a lot of rules and regulations. From the bunny side of it, what they told me was they felt very protected and concerned about, Nobody could ask their well, if people asked their telephone number, they couldn't give out their telephone number or their last name, or they couldn't, do it for another girl. If a customer called them over and said, "What's that girl's last name?" they couldn't do that. Nobody was allowed to, heavens, touch the bunnies, or they'd be asked to leave immediately or say anything rude. They were very well protected. But from the Playboy side of it, I think the reason was they were protecting themselves. They had the government watching them, they had the church watching them, and every civic group in every city waiting for them to make a mistake. And if it looked like the girls were being too friendly or soliciting, the customers, they'd be closed down as soon as they could.
They really were, and understandably so, again, because of the shocking material that's in the magazine, given the time of the 50s and 60s. But they really were kind of always under massive scrutiny. I know, too, that in the 70s, when they kind of fled to L.A. after kind of, there was, I don't believe you cover it in the book, but there was a murder at the mansion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or some sort of, there was some death that happened at the mansion. And forgive me if I'm mischaracterizing it as a murder. But yeah, it was definitely under cloudy circumstances. And yeah, pretty much, stayed at at that point, the LA mansion was already established and stuff. But it is unfortunate that there is a lot of bad feeling, I'm sure, on Playboy's part. And it was a very heavy moral hand here in Chicago that kind of, I think, kind of pushed them away finally in the 70s.
Right. It's a little funny story. Victor Lowndes, who was, the second in charge and Hef's friend, and he really was in charge of the clubs. Hef ran the magazine, and Victor Lowndes took care of the clubs. But Victor told me a story because I asked him, I said, quite frankly, we're talking about the 60s, and the mob was involved in nightclubs all over the country. And
Absolutely.
I said, how did Playboy avoid doing business with the mob? And he said it was really, really very simple, that at one point Hef did have a visit from certain family members, and they suggested that they thought it was a good idea for them to do business together. And Hef just very quietly explained, what we were just talking about. He said, I have the eyes of the government, civic leaders, and the church watching every step I make. He said, do you really think it would be smart for either of us to get into business with each other? And, these people that came to see him kind of thought for a moment, and they said, you make a good point, and they never approached them or gave them any trouble again.
It doesn't surprise me, and that's how the city works on both sides of the law. So that really, exactly. There's your typical Chicago story right there. Wow.
Right.
Unbelievable.
And a typical Hef story, too, because he can boil anything down to logic. And, Hef doesn't get too much credit or enough credit for being a really brilliant businessman.
First, I'm curious about your tackling this subject, and because I didn't really, I saw in your bio that you were a former model. Were you ever in the magazine yourself?
No, not at all. My little niche is entertainment history. I love doing research about it and finding out about old nightclubs and going to the performers we still have around and asking them to tell stories. I'm just the nerd that likes to sit and write about it and do research. But, I found that we were losing so many great entertainers. My last book, The Persian Room, which was about the Persian Room, after that book came out, I lost Andy Williams, had given me an in-depth interview.
Fantastic.
Patty Page, Polly Bergen, Celeste Holmes.
Wow.
All these folks passed away. And, touch wood, I was lucky enough to get at least a small part of their story before they did. And with Playboy Swings, I spoke to Joan Rivers just months before she passed, Steve Rossi, Al Boletto, who was very big down in New Orleans and helped integrate that club. Just many, many entertainers who aren't around to tell the story. So I feel very privileged to be able to talk to these folks and let my readers hear from them what it was like. I guess that's a long way of explaining how I kind of came to entertainment history, and I kept hearing Playboy. People I would talk to said, I performed at Playboy, or I was at the Jazz Festival, or on the TV show, and I was surprised to find out that Playboy for almost 20 years was the largest employer of entertainment in the country. And I thought, if I was surprised, other people would be surprised. And I'm finding that's true.
Did you count how many people, when the research was done, that you spoke to about this? Or as you say, was it in some cases part of your interviews for the Persian Room and some other projects?
No, specifically for this book, it was over 200. So it was in the hundreds. Funny enough, somebody had asked me, could you make a list for us of all the people that performed at the Playboy Club?
Oh, okay.
And John, I just said, it would be so much easier for me to make you a list of who wasn't there. Everybody,
Sure.
We mentioned Aretha Franklin, Al Jarreau started at the Playboy Club. She was part of a duo, Al and Julio. Joan Rivers, she started at the Playboy Clubs as part of a trio. It was Jim, Jake, and Joan. So all these people and all these stories that people just don't know about, and the importance of the clubs in giving people work and letting them find their footing, work in front of an audience before they either broke out to the next level or, some of them didn't. Some of them just were able to work 40 weeks a year for 10 years at the Playboy Clubs, doing what they loved, supporting a family, and their names you don't know about. But then other people like Al Jarreau was discovered at the Playboy Clubs, and Joan Rivers was able to advance to the next level. When she came back to the Playboy Club, she was a solo stand-up. And then the third time she came back, she was a headliner. So a lot of people came through those doors.
I remember hearing George Carlin in interviews, too, talk about his early career, and you touch on it in your book about he was with Jack Burns, who in the 70s was known for the comedy team of Burns and Schreiber, and Burns also replaced Don Knotts on the Andy Griffith Show in the deputy role from that Don Knotts left and everything. It was cool to see. Yeah, Carlin was another guy that seemed to evolve. And then, too, you really get into the Dick Gregory story, and I'm glad because that's such an amazing story that, because he's an advocate, people might know him more as an advocate. And it was, and you might not know this, but, 40 years ago, he was really a great comedian. Hell, 50 years ago, he really stopped in the 60s, now that I think about it. And did you get to speak to him directly? I know that sounded like that was one of your, yeah.
It did. I spoke to him at length, and when he got his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame last year, the first thing he said in his acceptance speech was that he credited Hugh Hefner for helping to break the color barrier at the Playboy Club when he was a young man, and that was his big break. So a lot of people give Hef a lot of credit, and Hef never, in my opinion, never set out to be an activist. And I think he was surprised sometimes when he'd get a fallback. He was just doing what he thought was right. He didn't believe in segregation. And I think he was genuinely surprised when he'd have mixed races on his TV show, and advertisers would write in threatening to pull their advertising because, it wasn't what he set out to do, but he never backed down from it. He was just doing what he thought was right. And many people credit him with advancing all kinds of human rights, civil rights, gay rights, women's rights. He just believed in, all kinds of freedoms. People should be free to do what they want.
On the TV show, it was interesting to learn that stations in the South just refused to carry it. Both TV programs, one in the early 60s and one in the late. It was first Playboy After Dark, and then it was Playboy Penthouse?
The other way, yeah.
Oh, it is the other way. Excuse me. Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Penthouse was first, and Penthouse was from Chicago, and was the second one as well. No, the second one was in L.A., right? Or
right.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, the first few shows were 1959, and to have even a star as big as Nat King Cole come out and talk for a bit and then sit down on a couch with a white woman, that was, just something
shocking.
That a lot of people could not accept. And it was amazing.
Well, and also you talk about in the book how each club had its own quirks in a positive way and then sadly in some negative ways, because, again, it was the 60s, and the club in Miami and the club in New Orleans certainly had its issues.
Right. They had their battles for segregation. Both those were franchise clubs to begin with. Another forward-thinking idea of Hefner's, because franchising was really just a very young idea at that time. And Hef had partners both in Miami and New Orleans, and he didn't think anybody would really enforce segregation, and these two partners did, both, again, in Miami and New Orleans especially, and they were blocking black members from entering, and music trios were being segregated, and it was just a bad scene. And Hef and Playboy bought those clubs back at just a huge profit to the folks that had them, but that was the right thing, that Hef thought he could do to set the record straight.
Yeah, that was really cool. I mean, that's the thing. You just keep hearing about these kind of things that he did. And I know there was a recent documentary that really went into Hef's activist period and everything. So I think the book, the stories you tell about what happened at the resorts and clubs help with that. Lainie Kazan. I mean, my God, we talk about, the advancements of men and stuff. It was really cool. I had no idea that the woman who plays the mother in My Big Fat Greek Wedding and is a wonderful, it's great to see her now as this tremendous character actress. And my favorite year back 20 years ago or 30 years ago, another great performance of hers. But, maybe some people forget that, like in the 60s and 70s, a hell of a singer-entertainer and also, as you point out, a hell of a businesswoman.
Right, she was. And she just finished filming My Big Fat Greek Wedding, too. So that's coming up. We had dinner not too long ago, and she was just back from filming that. But Lainie is a force of nature, and she took over to begin with, the L.A. club, one room in that club to help try and turn it around, and did just an amazing job with that, so much so that they asked her to do the same thing in the New York club. So there were a lot of fun, interesting stories, especially one from David Benoit that he told me starting, when he was a young teenager, that he started playing for Lainie in Playboy, and some extra performances they had to do for some friends of Lainie's.
We'll let people read it in the book, but that's the thing. No, I'm really these people like and Victor's last name again, was it Victor French? What, is that his name?
Lowndes. Victor Lowndes.
Ah, okay. Well, I had no idea about his role in the Playboy empire, but no, it's amazing, and the stories are just great from the entertainers, the bunnies, and the executives. It's very interesting, and a real side of the business that I don't think a lot of people understood, and also again this cultivating the culture and really grabbing this age group and kind of fulfilling Hef's wishes of like, hey, this is how to be cool, come join me, and making it affordable and making everybody feel like they were really ringside to this incredible happening that was going on pre. The swinging, not the swinging 60s, because certainly Playboy was part of that. How did the impact of like the British invasion and really 60s rock and roll affect the magazine? I know, and you mentioned in the jazz polls, which really did start off as incredibly pure really great jazz poles. But, as pop music would creep in, Peter, Paul, and Mary might find themselves with the vocal groups. And so folk and even in some cases some rock was kind of finding its way in the jazz poles.
Right. They opened it up to the subscribers, of course, and they voted, and, they voted for their favorite, whatever, guitar player. And so you would get some country singers or what have you. But you mentioned the swinging 60s, and it was a young time, and the sexual revolution and the pill and women's lib, and it was a great time for the clubs. I think that's why, the idea of having bunnies run around and serve, was so popular. The club in London was a crazy club too, crazy successful, but it had all the swinging folks from London. That's where it all really began. I think the swinging 60s, but it was I wish I could have lived during that time. And I think Tony Bennett told me, he said, Hef took having fun and made it into a business, and a very successful business. He took the concept of how to have fun and just made it into this huge fun business. And that's so accurate.
Okay. And how would you say, it was interesting too, you kind of, I think, point to, we talk about the comedians that did well at Playboy and how it was this, important circuit that could really keep a comedian's career alive. And it seemed that just as the resorts and the clubs were winding down, that's kind of when the rise of cable was happening. And maybe that kind of sucked the life out of going to a nightclub to see, a great comedic performance because you could stay at home and watch it on cable. And again, funny, George Carlin and Robert Klein were those guys that obviously did work the Playboy circuit, but they were the spearheads to that next evolution with HBO.
Right. Although I've heard a lot of the comedians say it was a sad, demise for them because they got paid to do the circuit, where, all the HBO specials and MTV and, well, I guess MTV wasn't comedy, but, all the TV specials, they didn't necessarily get that regular paycheck. And everybody liked that circuit. They could fill in between gigs, even big stars, Ramsey Lewis or Sonny Rollins or, Monty Alexander or Rich Little or anybody. They could take 2 weeks if they were going to, have 3 weeks off between gigs in any specific town. They could, find something to do over at the Playboy Club and get paid for it.
Understood.
So I think you're right with the advent of TV and the cable channels really kind of fed into the demise, and all the times changed. Disco came, and, the fantasy of the bunnies was, perhaps not what it once was.
Right, and that's true too. I mean, certainly we found ourselves in a more corrective decade, and I think the moral compass. I think people were like, all right, put your pants on, enough.
You're right.
Pretty much. You're
so
right. Yeah, and I'm sure that didn't help. And also, again, the weird thing, and I love it. I heard Bill Maher make the joke. He was saying he was imitating Vladimir Putin, saying, "I don't understand you pay for health care. Yeah, you pay for health care, and your pornography is free." And it's kind of true. Unfortunately, I saw that great Bob Guccione documentary as well, and Playboy, I think, suffered from it. The freedom of pornography also helped contribute to the decline in the magazine. And, now, again, Playboy kind of sees itself restructuring. But you say at the end of the book that there's hope. And I wonder how much that did come through in terms of the people you spoke to. How many active, employees of Playboy, that are still part of the business and stuff, did you speak to? Did you speak to a lot?
No, there's not a lot anymore. I spoke to, dozens for sure, but, not like when Chicago had the Playboy offices there with just, floors and floors of people, and all the clubs had people. we just don't have that anymore. We don't have the clubs. I did go to London and talk to everybody over at the London Club, from the manager to the gentleman who runs the world-famous bar that's in the club there, and it was adorable, really, because it's London, and you still have bunnies, and they're still beautiful, and the outfits are still attractive, and they serve tea. So, and in the afternoon in London, you can have your tea and be served by a bunny in the Playboy Club. It's all very civilized.
That club came back in your book, you say 2011?
Yes. And it's doing great, and it's beautiful, and very... You almost, I don't even know how to phrase this. I don't want to say you're stepping back into time. It's very modern and hip, but, you feel like it's a special place. Very sophisticated.
The classic vibe. That's great, and that's exactly what one would hope for if they were to go to a Playboy Club today. So that's one. So is that the sole club right now?
That's the only one right now, although headquarters says they have a lot of plans for other clubs around the world. And I was talking to, of course, many, many entertainers, and many, like Lorna Luft and even Lainey, said, if there are other clubs that open up, let people know that I want to work them. So I think that's really the highest compliment that anybody could give. Lorna said, the Playboy Clubs was the type of job that as soon as it was over, you were asking your manager when you were coming back. When am I booked here again? So it was. That's terrific. That was cool.
Absolutely. No, I honestly hope this works out. Is it being franchised then? Is it being licensed from Playboy, or is this part of the organization? I see. Okay, so it's a separate.
Yeah. It's like the original concept was with the franchise partners.
Sure.
Playboy just taking on partners.
Well, and that makes sense. I mean, in today's business and stuff like that, absolutely. You let nightclub people run a nightclub, and I think that's terrific. No, that's wonderful. And as you say, you want to experience that kind of hip Playboy vibe. So, I mean, that's great. And I would imagine that it would work, especially internationally, to kind of a theme nightclub, I suppose.
Right.
When you think about it.
I have to tell you a story about how they opened, and I can tell it in the book, but it was back in 1959, and Playboy magazine had run an article about another nightclub, the Gaslight nightclubs, and Victor Lowndes had gotten all these letters. It was back, of course, before computers, and you could shoot off an email, and men actually sat down and wrote letters, and Victor went to Hef, and he said, I have about 1,000 letters from readers who want to know more about this nightclub. He said, how do you want to handle it? I don't feel that we should really be giving them, too much more free publicity. Should we talk to them and ask them to buy some advertising, or what do you want to do? And Hef said, gosh, isn't it too bad we can't open our own nightclub? And Victor and Hef kind of looked at each other, and they said, well, why don't we? And then, after they noodled it around for about an hour, Victor says, you know what? It's a great idea, only we don't know bupkis about running a nightclub, but I know a friend of mine that does. So Victor and Hef went over to Arnie Morton's restaurant, who later went on to Morton's fame.
Yep.
And the three of them sat around, and Arnie says, oh, there's no trick to it. I can take care of the food and beverage, and Victor can take care of entertainment, and, Hef is a visionary. So they all threw money in. They all put $10,000 in, each of them. Hef took 2 shares, one for Playboy, the company, and one for himself. And so it was the 4 of them put $10,000 apiece in, and started that nightclub.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it goes global. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, and have the right answer at the right moment like that. That's the thing, man. No, I really do think that you kind of play out that genius business acumen that they had in creating this empire. And again, yeah, like you point out too, that this is very early in the history of franchising and stuff, and also trademarking. I mean, that's the other great thing is, and truly, this is Playboy's still actively great asset is the logo and the ideal that they were able to, manufacture and create over these 60 plus years.
Right. And they were very forward thinking. They trademarked the bunny outfit, so up even in 2015, anybody who wants to sell a bunny outfit, if they don't get the permission, they're up for copyright infringement, and they actively guard that. So there are a lot of forward-thinking ideas. And one of the great joys to me in interviewing everyone was people were happy, to talk about Playboy. Even Joan Rivers, she smiled and
absolutely.
Just, they were young and they thought anything was possible. They thought they were all going to be stars, and many of them did. Many of them became big, big stars. Al Jarreau said Playboy was like a little engine that could. You just knew that if you kept plugging away, something good was going to happen. And it did. They all enjoyed their experience there.
Absolutely. No, earlier this year, I spoke to one of the deputy editors over on the digital side, and I talked as well about these same things in terms of Playboy's importance in fiction and nonfiction, as I said earlier, and your book really does lay out the entertainment side, both the clubs and then in the forms of jazz music and comedy as well. It's really an important part of 20th century history. And hopefully with what's going on in the British club and maybe some other clubs and stuff, and also as the magazine and online presence changes, we'll see what happens in the years to come. But the book is called Playboy Swings, tremendous book by Patty Farmer. Highly recommend it, and really pleased to have this opportunity to talk to you about it, Patty, because I really enjoyed it. And what are you? Can you tease us perhaps on what your next entertainment history subject might be?
You know what? There is so much going on that I'm not done with Playboy yet. So the publisher cut 150 pages from this book, and I could have written another 1,000. So I'm not letting go of Playboy. There's still a lot to be told. And this story.
I meant to ask. Yeah, no, please go ahead, and then I'll ask my question. Go ahead.
No, I'm so sorry. I was just going to say, this story, people just didn't know. When I talk to people around the country, I always say, what's the first thing you think of when I say Playboy? And, of course, it's bunnies and centerfolds. But, the second thing really should be music and great entertainment. But there are so many people that don't know about it. So I'm still out there uncovering all these nuggets.
I wondered if, and I meant to ask this earlier, and your answer inspired me to ask. I imagine these interviews and stuff. Did you record them? Do you maybe see putting something out more multimedia beyond the book itself?
I don't think so because my interviews are so in depth, and we cover just such a multitude of topics. Primarily Playboy, but we do go off into other venues and other avenues. So I think I'll just write about it for now.
Okay. Because, I even wondered in this age of podcasting, not even necessarily a documentary or anything, that expensive or even big production. But, as you and I speak right now on a podcast, I thought, man, I'd love to hear some of those interviews that you did with the people that you quote in the book.
Yeah, that's something to think about.
Well, there you go. And you're about to embark on a big tour for the book, right? I am. We've started already. New York and Chicago. Although I have been invited back to Chicago already. I was there about a month ago, and plans are being made to come back in the spring. So I'm looking forward to that, doing a bigger tour in Chicago, and I had 2 book signings, one TV show and a couple radio shows.
So I'm really looking forward to coming back. They're probably March or April.
Okay, well, I hope to see you. I'll make mention to your PR people and let me know when you're coming back through Chicago. That'd be great to meet you, and thank you for this great opportunity to talk, and also the excellent book. It's called Playboy Swings. It is out now as this podcast is released, so no reason not to pick it up and enjoy the words of Patty Farmer. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Oh, thank you so much, John. I really appreciate it.